What if the Christianity that changed the world was not the same Christianity that first appeared in hidden rooms, around shared meals, whispered prayers, and a burning expectation that history itself was about to crack open? Because early Christianity was not born as a polished global religion with cathedrals, denominations, and centuries of settled doctrine. It began as something far more raw, far more dangerous, and in many ways, far more mysterious. To understand early Christianity, you have to step back into the first-century world. Judea was under Roman occupation. Jewish society was tense, fractured, and full of expectation. Many were waiting for divine intervention, for a Messiah, for the restoration of Israel, for the end of an age. At the same time, the wider Mediterranean world was saturated with Greek philosophy, pagan cults, imperial propaganda, and mystery traditions that promised transformation, salvation, or contact with the divine. Christianity was born Jewish, but it grew inside a Greco-Roman world, and that tension would change everything. At the center of it all was not originally a new religion called Christianity in the modern sense. It was a movement around Jesus of Nazareth, his teachings, his death, and the conviction among his followers that he had been raised and exalted. The earliest believers did not think they were joining a separate civilization. They believed they were living inside a decisive moment in sacred history. They gathered in homes, shared food, baptized converts, prayed, healed, and expected the kingdom of God to break into the world with urgency. Early Christianity was more communal, more apocalyptic, and more existential than many later versions of the faith. And this is where many people miss the real story. There was never just one perfectly uniform early Christianity. From the beginning, there were different emphases, different communities, and different interpretations. The followers around James remained deeply rooted in Jewish practice. Paul's communities opened the door wider to Gentiles and pushed a universal message across the Roman world. Johannine circles spoke with a more mystical tone, full of light, rebirth, spirit, and divine indwelling. Other groups emphasized hidden wisdom, visionary revelation, or radically different views of matter, spirit, and salvation. What later became orthodoxy was not the only voice present at the start. It was the voice that gradually won the battle over authority, doctrine, and memory. That matters, because once you realize early Christianity was diverse, the whole picture becomes more interesting. It stops looking like a neat institution descending from heaven fully formed, and starts looking like a living struggle over what Jesus meant, what salvation meant, and what kind of transformation human beings were actually being called into. Scholars like Elaine Pagels and Bart Ehrman have helped bring that complexity back into view, even if people debate their conclusions. The point is not that everything was chaos. The point is that early Christianity was alive. So how did it relate to paganism? Not in the lazy way people often imagine. Christianity did not simply copy pagan religion, but it also did not grow in a vacuum. Early Christians rejected idolatry, rejected emperor worship, and sharply distinguished themselves from the sacrificial systems of the surrounding world. But at the same time, they had to speak to people shaped by Greek thought and Roman culture. That meant Christian ideas were often explained through categories the wider world could understand. Concepts like logos, soul, virtue, immortality, and cosmic order were already part of the intellectual air. Christianity confronted paganism, but it also translated itself within a pagan world. This is one reason the movement changed. A message born in a Jewish apocalyptic setting had to survive in cities full of Greeks, Romans, soldiers, merchants, philosophers, and initiates of mystery cults. As Christianity spread, it adapted. Not always by surrendering its core, but by learning new language, new structure, and new forms of expression. In my opinion, this is where the real story becomes fascinating. The faith did not only spread because it preached. It spread because it could absorb, reinterpret, and transform the world it entered. And there was another layer to early Christianity that still draws the attention of mystics, esoteric Christians, and serious students of symbolism today. Its inner, initiatory quality. Not secret society in the modern sense, but a path of transformation. Baptism was not just a public label, it was death and rebirth. The Eucharist was not just a ritual meal, it was participation in a sacred reality. The old self dies, the new self is born. The body becomes a temple, the heart becomes a place of indwelling spirit. That language resonates deeply with perennial themes found across traditions: purification, inner, illumination, union, and rebirth. This is exactly why experienced practitioners in the esoteric world often return to early Christianity with fresh eyes. They may read the crucifixion not only as a historical event, but also as a symbol of the death of the lower self. They may read resurrection as the awakening of the spiritual body. They may approach prayer less as petition and more as inner alignment. They may see the Sermon on the Mount not just as moral teaching, but as a discipline of consciousness. That does not mean early Christians were secretly hermetic magicians in disguise. It means the structure of transformation inside the tradition can still be recognized by people trained to notice initiatory patterns. This also helps explain why Gnostic movements emerged around the Christian story. In the first centuries, there were groups who interpreted Christ through the language of hidden knowledge, cosmic exile, spiritual awakening, and liberation from ignorance. Some of these groups saw the material world itself as a kind of prison or distortion. Others treated salvation as an ascent of consciousness. The mainstream church pushed back hard against these views and over time drew sharper boundaries around acceptable belief. What became Christian orthodoxy was shaped not only by devotion, but by controversy. In other words, the Christianity most people inherit today is the result of centuries of selection, argument, exclusion, and consolidation. And then came the major historical shift. As communities multiplied, Christianity needed leaders, teachers, texts, and standards. Bishops gained authority. Canon began to solidify. Creeds emerged. Institutional structure became necessary for survival. Persecution forced cohesion. Heresies forced definition. And eventually, imperial recognition changed the scale of everything. Constantine did not invent Christianity, but he did help accelerate its transformation from a persecuted network into a civilization forming. Religion. Once a movement enters alliance with empire, it cannot remain exactly what it was in the upper room. That is the deepest difference between early Christianity and modern Christianity. Early Christianity was closer to a charged communal movement expecting cosmic change. Modern Christianity, in many of its forms, is more systematized, more institutional, more legal, more denominational, and often more concerned with maintaining identity within history than standing at the edge of its end. Early Christianity was more fluid, more dangerous, more visionary. Modern Christianity is, in many places, more organized, more stabilized, and more integrated into culture, politics, and social life. That does not automatically make modern Christianity false or early Christianity pure. It means history leaves fingerprints on revelation. So where do secret societies come into this? Carefully. There is no serious evidence that modern secret societies are a direct hidden continuation of the earliest Christian communities. But there is a reason later esoteric groups kept returning to Christian symbols. Rosicrucian currents, esoteric masonry, mystical Christians, and initiatory schools often saw in early Christianity something they deeply recognized: symbolic death and rebirth, spiritual brotherhood, sacred architecture of the soul, and the idea that exoteric religion can conceal deeper interior meaning. The connection is not one of simple lineage. It is a symbolic affinity and, in some cases, a later esoteric rereading of Christian origins. And maybe that is why this subject still feels so alive. Because when people study early Christianity closely, they are not only learning history, they are confronting a permanent question. What happens to a spiritual fire when it passes through institutions, empires, doctrines, and centuries of adaptation? Does it become protected, or does it become covered? Maybe both. And that is why I want to ask you something. Do you think Christianity became stronger when it became institutional, or did it lose something essential from its earliest form? Let me know in the comments, because that question goes deeper than history. For me, this is where the topic becomes personal. When I first understood that early Christianity was not just the smaller version of modern Christianity, but a world of urgency, symbol, sacrifice, inner transformation, and competing visions, it changed the way I looked at religion completely. It stopped feeling like a frozen system and started feeling like a living mystery. And if this perspective is giving you something real, take a second to like the video, because that tells me you want more deep explanations like this. In the end, early Christianity was not simply the beginning of what came later. It was a threshold, a movement born in Jewish expectation, shaped in a pagan world, contested by rival interpretations, transformed by history, and never fully exhausted by the institutions that claim to preserve it. Maybe that is why people still search for it today. Not because they want to escape the modern world, but because they sense that beneath doctrine, beneath politics, and beneath centuries of debate, there is still a call to inner rebirth. And now I want to leave you with one final question. If you had to choose which speaks to you more, the early mystical movement meeting in homes and waiting for the kingdom, or the later church that built civilizations, cathedrals, and creeds, comment below. Subscribe if you want more videos that explore the hidden structure behind religion, symbolism, and spiritual history. Share this with someone who still thinks Christianity is a simple story. And if you want to keep going deeper, click the playlist on screen, because this subject connects to everything from Gnosticism to Hermeticism to the anatomy of spiritual transformation itself.